Esport Research Report, presented by myself, Dr. Brian McCauley, here at Jönköping University in Sweden, and produced by Nicholas Hendelkens, who is a communications lead for the Esport Research Network. Today, it's ERN stalwart and board member, Dr. Oliver Leis from Leipzig University in Germany, whose paper came out in May 2026, very recently, called Stressors and Coping Among Esport Coaches, and it came out in the journal that is Psychology of Sport and Exercise. So, welcome to the podcast, Ollie. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, first of all, thank you for having me. I'm Oliver Leis, as you said, from Leipzig University in Germany, and I'm a postdoc researcher here where I've focused mainly on stress and coping, as well as applied sport psychology within performance domains, and a particular focus lies on esports. As you said, I'm also a member of the Esport Research Network, where I serve as the ombudsperson. And in addition to research and teaching, I spent some time supporting clients as a sport psychology expert in sports such as judo, canoeing, and athletics.
So, generally, esports is sport and you love sport. So, who did you write the paper with? Who are your co authors for this?
It was a great team. I was leading it, but I was happy to have Dylan Paulus from Australia, Mike Trotter from Sweden, Faye Didymus, and Laura Swettenham from the United Kingdom.
So, an international team of authors, and basically, for a general audience or for a researcher, what is the study about? What if you had to sum it up in 2 or 3 sentences?
Basically, what we did was exploring the experience of esport coaches and addressing environmental stimuli that they perceived as taxing or exceeding their personal resources. And we also addressed the way they try to navigate those demands that they were facing in their role as a professional or semi professional esport coach.
I mean, how was the study conducted? It sounds like it was qualitative.
Yeah, exactly. In the end, we interviewed 12 professional coaches using semi structured interview guides. And we spent about, maybe I'm lying, but about 75 minutes on average with each participant.
I mean, esport coaches must be able to talk about coaching esports, and they're delighted somebody's finally asking them something rather than them having to tell their players what to do, right?
Yeah, they were quite happy that someone was interested. And I remember back in 2019 when we conducted our first study, I think it was the second at the time, exploring esport players' experiences, that there was one coach within an esport team that said that this might something we want to look into from the coaching side. And this thought never left me. And after finishing my PhD, I thought, okay, now I have some space, I have some time, and I really want to do this project to focus on coaches as well.
I mean, based on your findings, right, what are the main stressors that esport coaches face in their roles?
Yeah. So clearly, we can assume that the majority of the stressors they faced are performance driven. But in addition to that, they also reported demands that are quite relational, organizational, and personal. First, they shared relational demands such as a strong responsibility for players' health, players' performance, but also their development. And this involved aspects like helping players to navigate team dynamics, conflict within teams, but also dealing with struggles beyond gameplay, such as relationship issues or post career transitions into different working areas. Second, they discussed organizational demands, and this mainly resolved around an unclear structure of the esport coaching system, but also lack of understanding of what the role of coaching actually involves or entails. And this was linked to coaches fulfilling multiple roles. But they were not just serving as a coach, but also as a manager for the team, an organizer, but also as an emotional anchor. And last but not least, and the third point would be personal demands. Here, coaches emphasized difficulty managing coaching with their personal life. This included long working hours, with some coaches reporting between 60 and 80 hours of gameplay per week within unsecure settings or work conditions with low payment and even difficulty switching mentally off after work and pursuing private plans, such as just meeting the girlfriend or the partner or friends. So we could say the stresses or the demands that coaches faced in semi and professional environments were quite demanding and not always protected.
I was in Paris for the last CS:GO major, and I talked to one team lead about working with. He had their team had this 18, 19-year-old superstar, and I talked about the challenges of applying sports science and health stuff, and he told me that player won't eat broccoli if they tell him to eat broccoli. So, is there certain aspects about the young sort of nature of professional esports players that are different, adds to the stress for coaches in this area, say, as opposed to football?
Yeah. So one thing that we saw that is also shared among sports psychology practitioners in a recent study that we are conducting is that the practitioners, irrespective of whether they are sports psychologists, clinical psychologists, or in our sample, esport coaches, often reported that they have struggled getting buy-in from the players and gaining trust and having players understand that the coaches have a saying. So that was quite a challenge for the coaches, which also made it quite difficult to help them develop, to help them see that coaching actually leads to improved performance or might lead to better well-being as well.
So if you're like a 18-year-old football player and you're not following the coach's advice, you're the other guy on the team, you're actually seeing him run faster, actually you can see the physical improvements based on advice. But for esport coaches, it's harder to say, hey, look, you're sprinting faster. It's harder to put metrics on improvement based on coaching advice.
Yeah, I think one of the main issues or one explanation might be that the majority of the esport players develop themselves as a high performance player without following a structured pathway. And by that, they learn that they can depend on themselves and they demonstrate some sense of success, which then might help us understand that they struggle with out of nowhere having someone external telling them how to perform, how to train, and how to interpret situations, how to focus in certain situations or scenarios, because it already worked. And if a coach did not demonstrate a similar career or even a higher performance career, then the trust might even be harmed as well. So that was quite a challenge for most coaches we interviewed.
You're not my dad, you're not my mom. Yeah, I mean, it's a difference. I mean, this is obviously, I say within a few years we're going to have more structured academy sort of approaches where players emerge through high school programs, and this problem may be negated a little bit. But what surprised you most about how these coaches experience and deal with stress in this environment?
Yeah, great question. What surprised me most was actually which of the stresses were emphasized by the coaches. Given that esports is quite dynamic and a visible environment, I or we as a team expected social media to play a more significant role in the accounts and experiences of the semi-pro and professional coaches. However, the stressors, as we just discussed, were mainly focused on team dynamics and organizational aspects. And furthermore, the stressors were quite basic. And what I mean by that is that even though we interviewed coaches from high performance environments within the best esport teams, stressors that we found were something like a lack of understanding of what a coach could do, random changes based from the management without consulting anyone, or even unclear structures within the esport teams. And this was not something that we would have expected within professional, but more like amateur or unorganized recreational esports. And with regard to coping, I was very struck by the fact that coaches consciously emphasize themselves as emotional anchors for the team. In other words, they actively try to regulate their own behavior in order to activate or downregulate players' arousal so that they can perform and develop to the highest level. And they also actively try to shape how players are perceiving, interpreting, and responding to situations. And last but not least, it was very interesting that almost all coaches put themselves second and prioritize their players. You might say, of course, that is what a coach should do, but this was done beyond or beside the fact that coaches struggled to a sense where they even reported to us that they experienced burnout, that they had long periods of not focusing on their own health and just giving their all in for the players. And one coach put it quite transparent with a quote like, "I fix the roof when the sun is out, not when it's raining."
And you never get that chance. I mean, one of the things I always think, and I've followed a lot of pro CS:GO and pro Valorant, and I've played both games. And to me, it always seems like there's an overwhelming amount of data available. There's an if Valorant, for example, you choose your agents, you match the meta, you examine the VODs of your opposition. You've got 5 different players, different agents, different maps, and then you've got all these opportunities to analyze stuff. And to me, it always seems like it'd be almost paralysis for any coach. Where do I begin with this team? I mean, how do I start? I mean, football, you start, you get them fit preseason. It seems less overwhelming than even though it's all about marginal gains as well. But to me, esports coaching just seems like I could not do it. Like I don't have the capacity, and I really admire the coaches that managed to do it.
Yeah, 100% agree. And this is also something we see in a different study with sports psychologists and clinical psychologists, that they report creativity and a lot of freedom as an opportunity. But this is also linked to challenges because we lack research in some sense. We lack theoretical models or ideas of how to implement or transfer from what we know from sports or other performance contexts into esports. And that also likely limits how players or practitioners in the field are trusting the process. So the amount of available options create some problems as well.
Yeah, I wouldn't even know where to begin. I mean, it's huge. Just as you're talking about this, it just occurred to me maybe your next study could be on the stressors of in-game leaders, the people who have to play and run the action in the heat of the battle. Surely it's a similar experience for them where they take on a role and they have to coach maybe the more junior members, have more game sense, and still have their aim or their abilities and stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in 2019, Smith and colleagues already addressed on the fact that we might want to research in-game leaders, and it was a study on Counter-Strike players.
In your study, what were the esport titles that your coaches were from?
The majority of them coached in League of Legends, but we need to highlight that some coaches coached in multiple titles. So it was not just supporting one team, but some of the semi-pros and professional coaches also worked in games like Counter-Strike, Rocket League, and esports like that. But in general, the most popular ones.
That blows my mind that people could coach League of Legends and Counter Strike. I mean, I didn't play League of Legends or start to play as my experiments because I went no, it would take me 200 hours to know a little bit, and by 500 hours I still wouldn't have any capacity in it. That's a I would say that esport coaches must tend to be pretty smart in general. You couldn't be a low IQ sort of
Yeah.
person to do something like this.
I very much perceive them as very reflected and smart people.
So, what sort of practical implications do your findings have, for supporting esport coaches in high performance environments?
I believe at first we should acknowledge that esport coaching is, in fact, a highly demanding environment, and that we can't or should change everything about it and how coaches are experiencing it. What I mean by that is that one first step could be to recognize that this is a thing, and by that, we likely normalize coaches' experiences and show them that they are not alone and that we see and value their experiences. And on an individual level, to make it more transparent, based on the coping strategies or the ways coaches navigated and reported this to us, we might argue that communication skills, creating shared values within a team, and shared goals is something highly beneficial, in addition to all the strategies that help coaches create a healthy and supportive environment, including players, team, and management. So if we do that, if we create trust, if we create clarity and team alignment, we reduce stressors on one hand, but also build resources with existing stressors in managing them. But importantly, not all responsibility should be placed on the coaches. And we should focus on the broader environment because coaches are situated within a broader system. And if we just tell coaches to learn how to better communicate, even though they already did, and to create shared goals and gaining trust first, it's important to not neglect the environment, because if the environment is poorly designed and structured and there's a lack of understanding, coaches can do everything they want to the sense of perfection, but they will fail because they can't influence everything. So we need to address the environmental structures as well. And here, as you already touched upon, this might involve broader structural or organizational changes, such as creating systems or development systems for players where they learn how to behave within teams. Not saying that all players are not behaving, but that they learn what is required for high performing players and high performing teams. We also need to create a better understanding of how a coaching role is defined in general. Of course, it does not apply to each individual team. And also implement support structures, meaning that we might want to implement performance coaches, sports psychologists, or clinical psychologists, depending on the available resources. But this might help us, just to provide one example, that coaches are not filling in different spots within a team, being a coach, manager, organizer, someone who does all the traveling and stuff, but to actually have someone to rely upon and delegate some tasks. And even if we change one thing now within the system, this takes time. This might look highly individual, and that, however, is very much needed to create more sustainable environments, because just accepting that coaches face burnout at high levels of performance is something that, yeah, seems very unhealthy.
I mean, it's like rugby or football. You know, they have a defensive coach or an attacking coach. You have a dead ball specialist. You have a performance coach. You have a sports psychologist. But in esports, what we're seeing is that a lot of professional coaches have to wear all the hats, or as you indicated, sometimes have to hop into a completely different sport.
Yeah.
Okay, Ollie, thank you so much for today. If anyone wants to get in touch with Ollie, his details are below this podcast on YouTube or Spotify, wherever else you're listening. And if you want to be an esports coach, you probably shouldn't, but Ollie will be happy to hear from you if you just want some advice on your journey. Okay, thank you so much, Ollie.
Thank you so much for having me. And once again, thanks for all coaches that openly discussed their experiences with us.